Hi, everybody. Welcome to Elizabeth Gossage's class. This is the class about reimagining Judaism. And I am thrilled that you all are here. Just for full disclosure, we are recording this class. So please know that if you say anything, you're going to be on the computer and we're going to record everything you're saying. So I'm not accusing you guys of being inappropriate. I'm just reminding all of us to it's recorded. Okay. If anyone has a question, you can put it in the chat because I'm going to ask everyone to please mute themselves so that we don't have dogs barking in the back and things, unruly children. And Leah, I'm not picking on you, but just trying to make it so that Elizabeth can teach unencumbered. Please put questions in the chat so that I can stop Elizabeth when it's time and we can ask her questions. And Elizabeth, I'll keep my eyes on the chat for you, okay?
Great.
I'm going to turn off my camera, but I'll still be here. And if you need anything, we're good. So without delay, it is my pleasure and gratitude to you for saying that you would teach this class today. Thank you, Elizabeth. Presenting on this incredible topic of reimagining Judaism, Elizabeth Gossage.
Hi, so thanks to all of you for being here. I'm excited to share this with you because this is really my passion. But one caveat I'm going to say is although Rabbi muted everyone so that you wouldn't hear dogs barking, you might hear mine, and I don't think you want to mute me. So please forgive my dogs. I have them locked up, but you still might hear them, so just so you know. And I'm going to start by sharing my screen so that you can kind of look at the things I'm going to be talking about. So let me start. I do these things slowly. Technology is not my huge asset. So let's share my screen. Yeah. So Rabbi asked me to talk about reimagining Judaism. And I think that it's important to first give some history and figure out why. Why are we reimagining Judaism? So let me start with some history. As I see it, there are three periods of Jewish peoplehood. Judaism of the wanderer. We wandered through the desert. We took our spirituality with us. We had God with us in the form of the Mishkan, the Holy Ark. Next period, we entered our homeland, Israel. We moved to a temple-based Judaism, a time where spirituality then became stationary. We weren't wandering, we were just there. And spirituality was through bringing sacrifices. All right, third period, temple was destroyed. We became Judaism of the diaspora. And that being said, we know that the rabbis then started to codify the laws, create halacha, the Jewish book of laws, and synagogues were built so that Judaism could be accessed everywhere you were and not just through going through a central location of the temple. So this is basically where we are today. Except there are those that say we're at a point of pivot, that say this Rabbinic Judaism has served us for thousands of years and it's not working. So what's next? What's the starting point? That's where the reimagining comes in. Well, how do we even know we're at a pivot point? How do we know we need to reimagine Judaism? So I'm going to talk to you about 5 reasons that are cited for this need to reevaluate the Rabbinic Judaism that we live with today. So we know just in our own temple, affiliations are dropping off, but not just in synagogues, in legacy institutions. all the large organizations that have lasted over 100 years are struggling. What else? People are either not involved. The last Pew report said that only 30%, 1/3 of the Jewish people in our country affiliate with a synagogue. So what are they doing? They're either not doing anything or they're creating their own new Jewish spaces. We'll talk about those soon. Another reason, the ethnography of Judaism has changed. It used to be that we would say, are you Ashkenazi or are you Sephardi? That monopoly has broken. There are Jews of every kind, color, creed, races. Indian Jews, Korean Jews, you name it, they're all making their voices. We no longer insist on recognizing matrilineal descent. That makes a change too. Interfaith marriage also creates part of this change. There are even non-Jews who are taking it upon themselves to live and create Jewish lives, even if they don't convert. Also, gender restrictions have faded away, allowing for transgendered people to play a greater role in Jewish leadership. Third reason, Israel's existing and it's here to stay. It's the first time in Jewish history that we have a strong Jewish community in Israel and a strong diaspora. That's especially true in the United States because we are the largest Jewish community outside of Israel. Also, people are looking for a broader sense of meaning and belonging. People are finding meaning in yoga classes, at CrossFit gyms, at Burning Man, all kinds of different places that they're looking for meaning. But there are those that are seeking for Jewish meaning, but the traditional methods and traditional offerings haven't worked for them. They're looking to make a combination of both, something new mixed with the old. Actually, there's a professor of Jewish study at Dartmouth. His name is Shaul Magid. He coins this term of people looking for a combination of the traditional with the new. He calls this vibrant secular Judaism. And lastly, technology and science are rapidly evolving so much and it's affecting us. Even prior to the pandemic, we saw social media, virtual reality, artificial intelligence fundamentally changing the way we interact. And now, post-pandemic, well, you can tell today. Look at how we're celebrating or observing Yom Kippur. Zoom bar mitzvahs are not just at Etz Chaim, they're commonplace. We're on the verge of making kosher pork through cloning pigs. And self-driving cars could make travel on Shabbat a reality. So I wanted to introduce you to Rabbi B'nai Lappi and her crash theory. Rabbi B'nai Lappi is the founder of Svara, and later in a couple minutes, I'll talk to you about what Svara is. But I think her crash theory is so interesting. She says that we are in what's called a sociological crash. And what that means is you crash because your worldview has changed based on new realities of life. So this is based on the fact that we all have stories. What kind of stories? Well, all human beings ask several basic questions to life. Questions like, why are we here? What's our purpose in life? How should we live our life? Jewish people look to Torah for those answers. So for the Jews, our master story is the Torah. what we're saying by all these things that I, in the last screen I showed you, all these 5 things that are showing that things are evolving, is that this is a crash, and the way we've understood our master story is changing. So what happens when is that the story doesn't work, there comes a crash, and there's 3 options that can take place during this crash. All right, so the first option that can happen during the crash is we can deny that it's crashing. We can say, no, Judaism's fine, nothing's happening, and we don't pay attention. We build walls around it to make it more secure and sure, and not to let in any threats. But I assume there's a price to pay for denying the crash. Second option, we can accept the crash and move to a new worldview. So remember I said our master story or our worldview right now is Torah. So we can move away, leave Judaism altogether, find a new story. Both options 1 and 2 are based on a premise that the story can't change, it's immutable. I don't believe that either. So there's option 3. Option 3, accept that there's a crash going on, that what we're living in now isn't working. Embrace it and create new from it, merging the 2. So if you want to put it in the chat, or if you want to answer, what would you say would have been the biggest crash in Jewish history? Anyone have any guesses to what they would call the biggest crash in Jewish history? I don't see any hands up or chats, but I'm not sure I can see them when I share my screen. Oh, Barbara.
I would say the Holocaust was certainly a big one.
Okay.
A lot of people questioned, how could there be a God?
Yep. I agree with you, Barbara, but it didn't fundamentally change how Jewish peoplehood observed Judaism. They may have questioned, but it hasn't fundamentally changed. So I don't disagree, but a crash, I think, is even bigger. Marge.
Darwin came along.
Okay. So we're talking about times of Jewish peoplehood, and that's bigger than even Judaism. So I'm gonna kind of answer this then. I'm sure there's other answers, and some of you might know. Leah.
Immigration, especially to the United States, with the assimilation into Christian life.
Right.
Still identifying as Jews, but especially the Reform movement.
Right. So I want you to think only things that affect Judaism. This is the crash that majorly changed Judaism. The destruction of the temple. We went from sacrifices to Rabbinic Judaism. Major change in Judaism. So what were the options when I'm going back a lot further. We haven't had a crash like what we're having now since the destruction of the temple, this big. So what were the options back then when the temple was destroyed? Option 1, the priests tried to maintain the status quo. They wanted to keep it the same. They didn't see that it was a problem even that the temple was destroyed. Remember, they did rebuild it too. So they tried to keep it the same. So then option 2, when I studied this flabbergasted me. 90% of Jews at that time chose a new story. They left Judaism completely. I have a typo. They accepted their fate as people and part of the Roman Empire. In other words, they became Christians. Third option, That's where Rabbinic Judaism came about. It was the smallest percentage of people that created Rabbinic Judaism. And that's what we live in under now, Rabbinic Judaism. Halacha, going to synagogues all over. That's what we're living in now. And what we're saying is that's not working now. So, with that being said, and with the fact that we say this doesn't work now, how can we reimagine Judaism? These are questions we can ask. Regarding affiliation, people not affiliating. The question is, how do we create partnerships between the legacy institutions and new organizations that are starting up? Regarding changes in demographics, what would it look like if we truly were radically inclusive? Question of Israel. We said this is a problem because strong Israel, strong Jewish population outside of Israel, right? So what would it look like if we changed the paradigm? How could we make it so that both communities, the Jewish community outside of Israel and the Jewish community in Israel, could be engaged with each other with respect and love instead of pointing fingers and judgment? What would it look like if we transcended our political and religious differences and share our best ideas with Jewish life so we could be elevated in both places? What about searching for meaning? What Jewish rituals and forms of expression can deliver meaning and belong in a new space, in a new reimagined space? Technology. What Jewish rituals and forms of expression can, oh, sorry, I went backwards. Technology. What changes are needed to bring meaning along with the changes of technology so that they become more common practice in Judaism? So these are questions we have to ask as we think about this reimagining of Judaism. Questions that we'll continue to ask and continue to struggle with. But I think there's good news and bad news for life in Judaism in the future. The good news is Judaism is going to continue to exist, even though there's attrition, even though there's intermarriage, even though people aren't connecting, it will exist. For some, the bad news, I think it's bad news, but for some, the bad news is it won't be recognizable as we understand it today. But for Judaism to stay meaningful and relevant, it needs to evolve. For us to architect the Jewish future, we need to embrace the Jewish past while listening to those in the present who are voting with their feet. Jewish peoplehood has always embraced changes that have allowed it to survive, even thrive, through transformational moments in history. Some of you mentioned some of those transformational moments, and we've thrived and survived through that. So I want to introduce you to a bunch of organizations popping up throughout the Jewish community that are beginning to create these types of changes. I want to start with a caveat. Although I could have come up with a list of organizations very easily on my own, I kind of did some research to see if there was anyone else out there that was endorsing some of these forward-thinking organizations. And on the bottom of this slide, you'll see a link to the article that I got these organizations from. Some of them I knew, and some of them I actually learned about. So the first organization I want to introduce you to is called Fuente Latina. Fuente Latina works with Spanish-speaking journalists to break down stereotypes and reinforce positive perceptions of Israel. Another organization. And it's interesting. This article is heavy in the Chicago area Jewish organizations. And remember, I just found this article. I didn't make this list up. So the Jewish Enrichment Center, which happens to be in Hyde Park in the city. Jewish Enrichment Center is reimagining Jewish education for children. It's rooted in empathy, text study, creative expression. Their programs aim to serve the whole child while nurturing their abilities to create social change in a dynamic Jewish and world around them. Another organization focused on children, Jewish children's groups. They reimagined and reinvented, words of this article, these are not my own words, a ridiculously cool Hebrew school. It has an educational model that aims to make Hebrew school fun again. Jewish Kids Group has grown into an independent network of 5 Jewish supplemental schools that educate and inspire children, engendering joyful Jewish identity, learning, and friendships. Next one, the Jewish Studio Project. It was created to provide a new entry into Judaism, one in which creativity is a pathway for connecting to tradition, cultivating community, and ultimately bringing more good into the world. Now, this organization, Kahal, I'm going to talk about this later in the discussion too, but Kahal is also based here in Chicago. Started in 2013. Kahal reaches about 40,000 Jewish students studying abroad during college. And they create connections, Jewish experiences and Jewish connections while they study abroad. Kahal has relationships with Jewish communities in, I think, 60 countries at this point. It's about 140 cities. Those of you that have kids thinking about going to college, you need to get hooked up with Kahal. Mishkan Chicago. Mishkan Chicago is a spiritual community that's reclaiming Judaism's inspiring and transformative essence. Mishkan is not bound by a particular location. They meet for soulful musical prayer, learning, and holidays in people's homes, event venues, and very religiously unconventional spaces around the city, bringing spirit, song, and celebration to places without a Jewish institutional presence. They don't. It's a synagogue without a home. Orot, Center for New Jewish Learning, happens to also be located in Chicago. Orot empowers Jews of all backgrounds to discover new entry points to the richness of Jewish wisdom. They work with local communities to partner with individuals and institutions to design custom Jewish learning experiences that help connect people to Jewish wisdom within their own lives, questions, and challenges in an impactful and informative ways. And remember, I introduced you to Rabbi B'nai Lappi, founder of Svara, which is a traditionally radical yeshiva, also in Chicago, dedicated to the serious study of Talmud through the lens of the queer experience. I want to define queer in this case, because how Rabbi Lappi defines queer is someone on the fringes. Someone on the fringes. Svara has a unique ability and pedagogy to make Talmud study accessible to anyone who wants to learn. At Svara, everyone, queer, straight, trans, Aleph Bet beginners, experienced Talmudists, secular, religious, Jews, non-Jews, all learn Talmud and Torah together in a mixed level Beit Midrash, house of study. So those are the 8 organizations that I wanted to introduce you to through this article. That actually, there's the link to the article. And there are many, many more exciting, innovative organizations that are popping up and have popped up over the last 25 years. But I admit none of us knows what the Jewish future will look like. The only thing we can say is we can be excited to help shape it. And I'm really excited about it. So here comes my shameless plug. This is what I'm doing to help shape and help connect everyone to these amazing organizations that are reimagining Jewish life. I've created a nonprofit organization and a podcast. My mission is to connect people to the organizations that are on the cutting edge of Jewish life. Speaking of Kahal, my last podcast was an interview with the founder of Kahal. Actually, the podcast was just published on Friday. So you can look for the Bridging Connections podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on my website, wherever you get your podcasts. Sorry, I have to have my shameless plug because this is my passion, really promoting these organizations that are moving into the new way of looking at Judaism. The option 3 of taking the old and combining it with something new and creative to make a new story for Judaism. So now I'm going to end by leaving you with a question, and then we can have somewhat of a discussion of sorts. My question to you is, how will Etz Chaim pivot? Which option will Etz Chaim choose? And just for future exploration, I wanted to share with you a blog that I think is quite helpful. It's a blog that's done by the Clergy Leadership Incubator. This is a link to their blog. It's a bunch of rabbis, clergy that are testing new ways in their own synagogues, and they come together and they study together. I think the blog has lots of great ideas and food for thought, and it's really in this space of reimagining how Judaism will look and is starting to change and pivot. So with that, I leave this in your hands. What will be the future at Etz Chaim?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for your amazing presentation. And I'm going to open the floor to anyone who would like to speak. You can raise your virtual hand, raise your physical hand, and I'll call on you and you can ask a question or say a comment. But I also want to I just want to say hi, everybody. I'm so happy you guys are here, and Shana Tova and all that good stuff. Okay, Joel.
All right, so here's the question. We had a major pivot about 6.5 months ago when we got hit by this pandemic. I like to think that this pendulum swung all the way from being naive in technology to supercharged in technology, although I think I see a couple technology people here. They'd say there's way more we can do. The question is, what is Etz Chaim, and I'm sure this is the same across the Jewish world. What is our life like when we can get back together? We don't have to be virtual. How virtual will we be? Will people still want to come to services? And it's just a question.
Yeah, and it's part of sort of the question I threw out to you. It's something that Etz Chaim will have to grapple with, along with all the other congregations throughout the country. But I can only foreshadow that we won't go back to business as usual. And the live stream, I mean, we were ahead of the game because we were already live streaming, right? Although we have even heightened up our technology, and I imagine that we'll go back to something that's very hybrid and gives people a lot more options than we ever had in the past. And of course, Rabbi, I imagine you have thoughts about that too.
I do indeed, but I want to give everybody else an opportunity to ask questions, weigh in. This is about you, Elizabeth. I can wrap it up later, but I want to keep it on you. So who else has a question, answer, problem, or comment?
I have a follow-up question to my question is, how are these new organizations doing in the pandemic? They were fairly new to start with. Some of them may rely more on in-person. Obviously not the one with the overseas students, is that how that reaches the overseas students? They were going to be electronic virtual, but how are Mishkan and all the other organizations you met doing?
So, everyone's doing, obviously quite different. Mishkan has also gone virtual, but they have a hybrid of some socially distant opportunities. I'll give you an example. Mishkan did slichot, sort of drive-in movie theater like. So those that were leading singing weren't at the on location, but on a movie screen, singing and leading song and prayer. But others were together sort of in their cars so that they could be together. So everyone's being creative, just like we have. And I think that really is what all of these organizations are doing. They've all come up with new ways to even further use the technology. And, some of those organizations that I brought up, I don't know much about, but I can say another organization that I'm very familiar with, which is called At the Well, which sort of has reinvented the Rosh Chodesh circle or Rosh Chodesh group. She's pivoted to doing a lot of Rosh Chodesh circles via Zoom. So, everyone's sort of in the same space and has learned how to use technology. Mishkan also, they live stream their Friday night services. Lots of synagogues are live streaming services on Facebook. So yeah, very similar to what we've done. And I imagine that they'll also have to consider the question you threw out of what does it look like once we're no longer in a pandemic period. I see some chat. Should I be looking in the chat to see if there's questions?
Yeah, so Gary wants to say something and then we'll go to the chat.
Okay.
Gary?
Gary, you're on mute.
Thank you, Joel. My son and I, last night, he's away at college. We did something a little different. We had on YouTube, we both have two screens, so we had the service up on YouTube, and then utilizing a little private video chat service. It was almost like we were sitting next to each other in temple, where we used to kind of talk to each other, make comments, and sing along. So it was the virtual version of that. And, it's something that other people could easily do as well.
I think it's great. And I think that, thank you, Gary, for sharing that, because I think that's important, that we need to share the new ways that we're reimagining Judaism for ourselves. And along those notes, on Rosh Hashanah morning, Saturday morning, I led a small service in a forest preserve. We knew that we could only have less than 50 people, and we knew we needed to be outside. So we didn't have any live music. We had a playlist on an iPhone and a speaker, and we prayed together. And we were in nature, and this is how my family and some friends, this is how we reimagined Rosh Hashanah for ourselves this year. I think there are so many creative possibilities, and the point is that we should share them with each other, because you might not think of what you want to do yourself, and something will resonate for you. I thought
So,
I saw a hand up.
Yeah, I have Kelly. Kelly, welcome to our group. Kelly, she wrote, by moving online, many organizations were able to broaden their audience and expand their reach. Those physically unable, or for other reasons, to be involved Jewishly can now participate.
Yeah, and that's sort of the beauty. You know, we curse COVID and we hate what it's done, but the truth is it has brought a lot of good, and so we just have to count the blessings that's also brought. I see Leia's hand up.
Well, I've noticed from my relatives that they seem to have developed more of a connection to Judaism because of the fact that they don't normally go to services and they don't belong to a synagogue. So they feel like they can actually bounce around from synagogue to synagogue, and they don't feel that guilt of not being Jewish enough, or that they're not doing something Jewish by not, being in a synagogue attending services. So it's sort of a way of accepting themselves for who they are and their level of involvement.
And that goes to the point that we talked about of this being radically inclusive, that we need to get to a point that nobody feels they're not Jewish enough, and accepting you no matter where you are, whether you're Jewish, not Jewish, interested in Judaism. And that's really the point. And a lot of these new organizations, they use that buzzword a lot, that buzz phrase, I should say, of radical inclusivity. And I think that at Chaim we've done a good job of trying to create that as well. Anyone else? Well, so if no one else is going to
Oh, wait,
speak.
no, we do. We have
Oh, we do.
Neil.
Oh, yes.
So Neil wrote in the chat, in just a few generations, we have gone from the Yiddish-speaking immigrant communities to the suburbs to intermarriage acceptance. And it's interesting, Neil writes this because there's even more shtus, if you will, happening in the larger world. So hold that thought, Neil. Elizabeth, do you want to speak to that?
I don't know that I can speak that much to it, but yes, of course we have, and that's part of the reason, the need to kind of reimagine things, because things have moved so far and so fast. But I also want to speak to the fact that regarding Yiddish, it's become very mainstream in English language. It's broken through. How many Yiddish words I hear my non-Jewish friends use regularly. So it shows that we as Jews are affecting dominant culture, which is great, because it's another way of showing how we're fully accepted citizens of our country, where times past Jews were never fully full citizens of any other country. So I think that says a lot about the times.
So I wanted to just speak to Neil's comment. Something that's happening in the rabbinical school right now at HUC is a debate, to your point, Neil, that a student who cares to enroll in HUC, Hebrew Union College, which is the Reform Rabbinical School, if you have a non-Jewish partner, you cannot be admitted. And it's something that it's a very controversial topic right now, because there are people who have non-Jewish boyfriends, girlfriends, and they won't be admitted to HUC. And this is now the new frontier of what's being fought at the rabbinical school. So I would say that intermarriage acceptance has occurred in the congregations, but it's not widespread quite yet.
If I may, I'm a current HUC student. I'm a second
Hi,
year student.
Kelly.
Hi.
Yay.
Yeah, I decided to show
Welcome.
myself.
I think you can speak to this, Kelly.
Yes. Yeah. This question is really pertinent and very tense within my campus community. I find that while the vast majority of my classmates agree that this is for the reform movement, it's making approaches and the accessibility of HUC, it's really making it not as accessible, especially for members of the queer and non-white community. It kind of tells them that they're less worthy, in my opinion. And when we try to bring this issue up to our administration, the administration says it's not on them, it's on us, it's on some of the donors of the institution. And those are the ones who are the decision makers, not the actual students. And that is problematic. And we find it really challenging.
That is amazing. Listen, first of all, I have to say, thank you for weighing in. Second of all, how did you find us? I'm dying to know.
I'm currently in the Bender family household. Yes.
Okay, fabulous, fabulous. Okay,
Yes.
wonderful. Okay, that makes total sense. And thank you for being courageous enough to weigh in with this crazy lot, because, but thank you for also giving us the inside information, because I only know it from the outside inside, but you're inside, literally. So very cool, very cool. Thank you.
I want to speak to something you said, Kelly, because I've heard that in making changes in these types of changes in other large and older institutions, that it's often coming, the resistance is coming from the donor base. So I think we need to get creative on how we get into the psyche and get into the mind of our donors and get them up to modernity, because it's not just there. And thank you for bringing that up.
All right, we have time for one more question, answer, problem, or comment if anybody wants to weigh in. If not, I'd love to wrap it up for you, Elizabeth. You did such a great job. Thank you so much for bringing us all of that information and taking us into this very provocative conversation. I want to speak to this topic from a what's happening with it, congregation at Chaim, how are we going forward into the future? Elizabeth and I had this conversation 8 months ago, and I was like, Elizabeth, I have a Titanic and we can't really maneuver the Titanic so quickly. What I'm finding is we have a Titanic. What I didn't realize is we have a lot of tugboats on this Titanic, and the tugboats are leading the Titanic into the new waters. So we can't be frightened of these tugboats in the directions they're pulling us in. And so I feel that my job as a spiritual leader is to take the guidance of the Elizabeth Gossages and the tugboats and say, let's use smaller groups to go off in these newer directions. And if they can come back without shipwreck, then perhaps the boat can go that way. And this way it gives time for the older donors, if you will, to catch up to where we are. Because if you think about it, let's go back 16 years ago when you all heard that I, a young mother with a female partner, was coming to be your spiritual leader. Was there not a little chaos back in the day? And today it's a non-issue. So again, I give Rabbi Bob a lot of credit for sending out the tugboat. And now we're in a very different direction. But I feel that, it takes visionary people, and Elizabeth, who did her thesis in this very subject, to reimagine and help guide us to the new direction that we have to go, because institutions are just that. We're really Titanics. But if we're going to survive and thrive, we have to go into these uncharted waters. Last thing I'm going to say, what we found from this pandemic, if you will, is we need the building. We just have to know how to use the building correctly so that it is a place of spiritual grounding, but we're not so attached to the building that we can't diversify and do smaller chavurot activities elsewhere. And the pandemic, to Elizabeth's point, has really made us, hello, my gorgeous ladies, look at you guys. There's our Hannah. The pandemic has given us the necessity to come together in smaller groups. So like Elizabeth said, a lot of good has come out of the pandemic. I feel that we are technologically 5 years ahead of where, maybe even 10 years ahead of where we would have been had this not happened. So I will send you off with a blessing for not only an easy fast, but to enjoy this day as a day of rejuvenation and nourishing of your soul. Thank you for all coming to be here to have Elizabeth spotlight this very important topic. And I hope that it was meaningful and enlightening for you as well. I'm going to keep the Zoom room open for another 7-8 minutes if anybody wants to talk and thank Elizabeth and just kind of hang out and see everybody. I'm here. I'm just going to close off my camera and thank you again. And I'm also going to shut off the recording so that you can talk. Thank you all. Thank you, Elizabeth.
I would like to make one more small shameless plug. I mentioned my podcast and my nonprofit, and I really launched that since the pandemic. So there are 8 published podcasts. There are about 4 more coming very soon. And I need your help. I need your help by going on, listen to the podcast, download the podcast, share my social media. The only way I can continue to do it is to start to get a following. And since you're my community, you're my heart, I'm counting on you to be my minions and to push out the word. So I'm going to continue with my shameless plug. www.bridges613.org. Please help me push this forward and have a following so I can get some recognition and then ultimately could get some foundations that will maybe donate to me so I can keep doing this work that I'm so passionate about. And I'll shut up now.